Don't
Yeah,
fall asleep. Don't fall
yeah,
asleep.
that's why.
Yeah. Okay. So welcome everybody to Talking Niagara. It's Friday, 12th of April, 2024. Today, Angela Browne and myself are discussing the topic of how we can ensure that we get high-value jobs brought to Niagara. So I think that's an important thing. And one of the things that I stood on in my election campaign when I was standing for election here in Niagara Falls is that we want to actually turn around this city from being one of low value, low wages, etc., to high value, having high value jobs in it. Yes, there's always going to be in any city in any part of the world. There's always going to be high value. There's always going to be minimum wage jobs or even below minimum wage jobs.
Yep.
Right. But the minimum wage is here for a reason, and we'll get to that. All right. So good morning, Mike Cushman. Happy to see you. And I don't think metaphysical of anything that you got to say. I just take it on face value. All right. Are you going to try something with the headphone?
Nope, I'm just plugging in my phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I always charge my phone when I'm on this computer.
Okay. All right. According to Todd Hickson, every job is valuable to the person who holds it. However, hiring more people doesn't necessarily make our companies or our economy healthier. All right. This is an article that Todd Hickson put up in Forbes magazine back in 2017. And he's talking about job creation and the major challenges of our time and how they should be a political hot button. And how for many entrepreneurs, job building is a confusing area. Thoughts?
Yep. Definitely what happens is I think once Niagara's population gets more, we get more people, more companies would be coming down here, and perhaps there would be more diversified economy. Right now, our economy is not very diversified.
Yeah.
Just about every job I see in the paper when I go, or not the paper, but on Indeed or any of the job ads that I look for, they don't really have high-paying jobs.
No. And
Okay?
what gets me about that is that, hey, you've been to college, you've got some college, you've got degrees, you've spent time educating yourself, or even if you're in the trades, you've spent time becoming a tradesperson. I remember a job one time where I was working with a lady in accounts for part of what I needed to do was get some data from her on accounts. So we were talking one day about jobs and levels of pay, and she was basically saying, well, she was the bookkeeper, just did all of the accounting, the accounts payable, the accounts receivable in the firm, and this was some time ago, but she was getting I guess the equivalent today of, let's say, somebody who was on $45,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that kind of that kind of role. Maybe she was earning as much as 50,000, in today's market. But what she was saying to me is that I'm going to night school, and at night school I'm doing my chartered accountant degrees. And essentially, the company she's working at, as soon as she gets chartered, her salary goes up almost double, right? Just because she has that charter qualification. Now, if you go to somewhere like Googleplex or Microsoft, you'll find that very few people, if any, have minimum wage, right? Minimum wage really they don't employ people who have minimum wage. Even the janitor might be a little bit above minimum wage, might only be, $20, $25 an hour or something, but he's got shares in Microsoft. So he may be, the lowest paid person in Microsoft, but he's still got shares in the company.
Yep.
Right. And why do we all end up with this situation of churning out people and putting them on minimum wage? Right. High schools need to, Mike Cushman saying, high schools need to start guiding people where the work is. Guidance counselors should work in conjunction with government to address where work is needed. Yeah, potentially as well. Yeah.
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah, to some extent. Like sometimes I think the trades are not promoted enough. There are people that could probably do the trades and do well in the trades. Okay? Because right now, I mean, how many times do you have to call a plumber, and can you find a plumber to come right away? And there's not very many plumbers out there, not many electricians out there.
Yeah.
And when you do get them over and you do some work for you, they get paid well.
Oh yeah, absolutely they do. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are people that like to work with their hands, and learning how to work with their hands. It's something that some people will enjoy. I mean, not everybody has to go to university. Okay? Not everybody has to do that. Some people can get into building trades. Some people can get into other types of trades.
Like agriculture, right? Mike's saying here that should be taught in schools, and our people should be doing what migrant workers are doing today. It should be instilled in our students how important these jobs are to our economy, especially in an area like the Niagara region, which is so dependent upon, workers in the, in the agriculture sector.
Yeah, except that is a very, very, they're not very well paid, from what I understand.
No, and this is something, the problem lies, though, with anything, when you talk about, the argument is there, when you talk about minimum wage. So the role of minimum wage is supposedly to shield workers from unreasonably low wages, to prevent employers from exploiting workers, to provide enough income to enable workers to have money, food, shelter, and clothing, to reduce the inequality and poverty, and provide a base rate for employees. The trouble is, it's not providing a base rate for employees, base pay rate for employees. It's providing the de facto norm rate for employees, the way that we run many companies operate today. So that was kind of what we were talking about, the role of minimum wage. And realistically, what I've said to many people, and I've said it to you in the past, is I have a firm belief that, hey, actually $16.55 an hour for Ontario, $17 if you're in a federal job. That basically should be the minimum wage for somebody who's fresh out of school, right? And or basically maybe a new immigrant who's coming into the country, one of these refugees that we've had that have come into the country recently, who's got zero experience in an area of work, and they're looking to build their expertise, become like a building trades worker or something like that, where the employer is taking them on. They might be 35, but they're taking them on, giving them a rundown of the trade, helping them understand what they're all about, and expanding their knowledge and capability, right? And providing them valuable Canadian work experience at the same time. Those are the sort of people that should be on minimum wage. Pretty well, if you're 55 years of age, right? Nobody should be employing you at minimum wage.
Yeah, and that's why they don't employ. That's why they don't employ anybody 55 years old.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem we've got.
Like if you or I went out there to the workforce and started applying for jobs, Peter, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, yeah, see, that part and parcel is a problem that we've got within our society, where the current modern mode of thinking is that a person who's 50 plus, certainly a person who's 60 plus, is now too expensive on the job market because, hey, take for example my prior role in information technology. I was I used to be, way back when I first started, a computer programmer. I used to design systems, design databases, design, accounting systems, design marketing systems and the like. Then I started to design what are called business intelligence systems. So I'd started to design those types of systems for people and developed in those kind of areas. And the business intelligence migrated to, what is now called big data and those kind of systems that often employ AI to assist in some of its higher level decision making. Now, somebody then, of course, decided, hey, well, Peter's just simply too expensive because he's got all this knowledge and we're just going to throw it away.
I was told in my 30s I was too overqualified for a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the point? You're trying to apply for a job. Why are you applying for a job? Well, because you need to feed yourself and put a roof over your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? And this is the problem. So that's why I gave up on trying to find work, because there just wasn't anybody going to be hiring me for any decent level of income. So I had to create my own.
Yeah. And actually, one of the problems about creating your own job and building your own business is that often the people you employ get more money than you get, right?
Oh, yeah. Like they're telling us that we have to pay a certain minimum wage and we have to give them more higher wages as time goes on. But what about the business owner? People forget that the business owners sometimes don't even make minimum wage.
Yep. Right. And basically, Mike Cushman's making the point that minimum wage used to be for students and unskilled workers as a start point in the workforce. Now, many more senior workers are doing jobs that teens used to do because because that's the way currently it currently works, and that's part of the problem with having minimum wage, because minimum wage actually is almost today. Minimum wage has set the standard for what is what every employer is doing, right? So instead of it being, if we're looking at it, minimum wage was conceived as a way to bolster wage workers, decrease class stratification. It was first introduced in the United States in the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. So minimum wage was put out there originally a long time ago to to help to help bolster the low end of the job market. It wasn't supposed to be for the higher end of the job market, for the workers that were already trained and qualified, etc., etc. It was to boost those that were on the lowest strata of the job market. Today, it seems to be pretty well everybody's employed at minimum wage. You go to any of these box stores, you're go to Walmart, for example.
Mhm.
You know, everybody there's 90% of their workforce is on minimum wage.
Yeah, which is ridiculous, particularly when we see Costco, which starts the workers at the area's living wage and then they move up
Yeah,
relatively quickly. And the prices that you find at Costco are very reasonable and
well,
they're not much
very
higher than Walmart.
competitive. Yeah, very competitive with Walmart.
Yeah. So if they can do it, why can't Walmart?
Yeah, and in
Or is
fact,
somebody trying to make a profit?
well, yeah, that's the point about it, is that when you look at the you know, the richest people in the world, the Walmart family's always up there in the highest levels rankings, aren't they?
Hmm.
Right, so
Yep, these are,
that's the Walton family, isn't it?
yeah, the Walton family.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And here Mike is pointing out one of the big problems. When CEOs are making 500 times what their workers are, it's a big problem. And yeah, and remember, Mike, sometimes CEOs are just employees, right? Well-paid employees, but just employees. They're not actually members of the board, other than because they happen to be CEO. You know, they may not even be shareholders in some companies. Right.
yeah. And this is one of the problems too, because this is where you have income inequality in your society, and the more unequal your society is, the worse off your society is. Like there's a lot more crime, there's a lot more teen pregnancy, a lot more high school dropouts, a lot more poverty, a lot more of the stuff that we don't want in our society. And when you have society that's more equal, like not to a point where everybody's paid the same, but where people could possibly go up the ladder, if they really want to.
Well,
And
yeah.
it's not possible now.
Well, it used to be, for example, I remember. I remember one person I worked with many years ago, and he said, you know, we were talking as people often do, and I'm always fascinated by how people got into the jobs that they got into. And one particular worker, one particular individual, he was a manager for the department that I was working with, I mean, because I was an external consultant for a software company. Here's how he basically got into, he was promoted to the manager of that department. He started with that company as a mail boy, at 16 years of age. In
Hmm.
fact, it may have been 15, right? He was somebody, don't know who, he recognized what he was doing, his contribution as a mail boy, as the most effective mail boy they'd ever had. And back in the day, of course, we're talking back in the day when companies had, even if you had 100 employees, you'd probably have 500 items of mail, right?
Yeah.
The average company. So he'd been sorting these mail pieces out, and it was the most effective guy in that job they'd ever had. So of course his manager thought, how can we use this guy better? So they put him on the production floor, right? And he was again a star on the production floor, always helping out other people who had trouble on their workstation, right? So often playing leading roles in all of those sort of situations. And slowly then he became like a tradesperson. They actually sent him to trade school, so he became a tradesperson, I think an electrician, and spent about 5 years on doing the electrical work around the firm, after he became in his trade. And then they promoted him as a manager, so eventually he's up in a manager, and he's a qualified tradesman, right?
Mm.
So essentially, his role in that company was always developing, and he was a fairly senior manager at the time. seen by a lot of people. You know, basically, if he went down to the factory floor, a lot of people would have respect, and a lot of the time, it's you know, they say, "Hey," now I don't remember his name, but "Hey, Mike, we got a problem with the electrics. I've called the electrician. He doesn't seem to have time at the moment to come." You know, the first thing he's up like on the phone, "Hey, you know, you've got to get the electrician down here on the line."
Hmm.
Right? So he's well, and you know, included, you know, he's works at the coalface, but works at a higher management level as well, and he's trusted throughout that organization, right? A very important guy, right? Actually, a
Yeah,
pleasure to work with him. Um, and the whole point is he started effectively at minimum wage in that job,
yeah. But
right?
unfortunately, you don't see a lot of that happening anymore.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know why, but if that place was unionized, I think they would have a lot more trouble getting up into other ranks.
Well, actually, that's an interesting question because unionization, one of the questions that's often argued about unionization is that unions actually make it more expensive to employ people,
Hi, Karen. Hi,
and
Karen.
you know, etc. So that can actually act as a detriment to the workplace.
Yeah, it can backfire.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the arguments that's always made against unions. But again, the argument for unions is often made that you know, especially when if you've got 10,000 people in the workplace, it's a heck of a lot easier to you know, to negotiate the wage increases with a small number of you know, trade union head people than it is to, you know, to negotiate wage increases for 5,000 people individually.
Yeah, and it's a lot more transparent too when you're in a union, okay? Because then you know people who are in this particular wage classification in this particular shop, they're making approximately this wage range, and people at this particular shop doing this particular task are making this wage range. So that is very helpful for people who want to go and work at that place, okay, to become
Yeah,
employed. So when they're starting to do that, it's more of an open book. Where nowadays you go into a shop or a business, well, you go in and your wages tend to be for your wages tend to be based on whoever's employing you and what they think of you and what they
yeah.
want to pay you.
Right. But Mike makes the point, if it was not for tyranny, we would not need a union. I'm not sure I would go that far, but I understand where you're coming from, Mike.
Yeah.
Right. And there are certainly some jobs whereby you kind of I shake my head every day at some of these employers.
Oh
Right.
yeah, some of
Um,
them really shouldn't be in business.
Right. And Mike also makes the point that one of the things that unions bring with them is stronger health and safety, you know, more
Absolutely.
health and safety accountability. Right.
Yeah.
And it's true. It is true. But again, you know, we go back to that question about, um, right, okay, so one of the disadvantages of increasing minimum wage has been seen as the probable consequence of increasing prices, arguably fueling inflation.
Yeah, that's true. Like small business, like when I'm talking about small business, I'm talking about your mom and pop shops, your people located downtown, your small restaurants, that sort of thing. To increase the minimum wage for on these people, it makes it harder for them to maintain payroll because it makes
Yeah,
your profit lines more smaller
well,
and more razor thin.
yeah, and if you're talking about, let's say, a restaurant, and a restaurant that employs five guys over, you know, over several shifts, when they're open, you know, including weekend workers, etc., etc., and the boss works alongside everybody else, right? maybe they're 5 to 10 guys somewhere in that region. All right. Now, if you think about just to maintain the hours that those particular individuals work, so they work their shifts, and if you were to put up the minimum wage by $1, that might actually equate to we need 5 more customers in here on an average week eating food.
Absolutely. And this is where it becomes difficult for small business. Like I said,
Yeah.
the Walmarts of the world, the McDonald's of the world,
Oh yeah.
all the places that are large corporate enterprises, they certainly could afford it. It's the ones that are small businesses, the local mom and pop and your thrift shops, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and part of the issue here is that if you're talking about the Waltons, and obviously you could improve the wages of every single worker in Walmart by $1 an hour, $2 an hour, without making the Walton family poor.
Absolutely.
Right.
Somebody did a meme one time on Facebook. They're talking if they tax the billionaires what they should be taxed, they still have lots of billions left. Like, it's not like we're taking everything away from them. You know, I mean, they have everything. And then plus to pay their workers more, they're not going to be losing a whole lot. Okay? And in fact, they would be benefiting from having more workers and people who would stay longer for the job.
The irony, Mike points out the irony it is best. We raise minimum wage because of overpricing, and then companies raise their prices because minimum wage went up.
Yeah, you want to avoid an inflationary cycle the best you can. Like, it was unfortunate we did we had to raise our prices a little bit. Right? We didn't raise them a whole lot because we didn't want to start gouging people, where they have to take 2 or 3 jobs to basically come to see us. But this is the thing that you don't want to do. But at the same time, you know, you need to be able to operate. You need to keep your doors open. So there has to be some compromise.
At the end of the day, sometimes small business has no choice but to put prices, put prices up. Okay, Kitchener, Karen's makes a good point here. In Kitchener, Schneider's had a union. Burns did not. Burns did not want a union, so they automatically matched Schneider's wages and benefits, so they didn't need a union.
Yep, that's what sometimes companies would do if they're trying to avoid a union.
But
I don't know why companies don't want a union. If you have a large company, I don't know why they don't want a union. You know, especially if you're willing to pay them higher wages.
Yeah, and the point being is that
if I was running a company, I'd welcome a union.
Well, I was going to say, if you're running a company,
make my job easier for me.
If you've got 5,000 workers, it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with a dozen people in a union representation situation than it is to individually deal with each of those 5,000 workers.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly, because that way it would make my job easier for me if I had that kind of a company that I was running. But I don't know why some larger companies don't want a union. It's like the Walmarts are very famous for not wanting unions. One of them, they demolished a Walmart in Quebec. I don't know if you remember that story.
Yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, because they just tore it down, got rid of everybody, and then they hired a bunch of non-union people where they rebuilt the Walmart, not very far away. I think it was just like a lot away from them or something, you know.
Yeah.
And it was just that actually went down to the Supreme Court. I think that there was they brought that to court about that.
Oh, okay. No, I remember it happened. Now, basically, there's so minimum, as I said, minimum wage was perceived in the US under President Roosevelt and on the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, and that has been what's driven minimum wage within the US for ever since, right? It's also what drives, I guess, the same minimum wage concept here within Canada. Many parts of Europe don't actually have minimum wage. And one of the things I would say is my experience of Europe not having minimum wage often means that they don't actually have they don't have as many problems. They don't have the problems about the majority of the workforce being employed at or just above minimum wage. One of the problems that we see is, let's say, for example, say if you're talking about a small workforce and the workers are all on let's say, well, minimum wage rate currently 16.55, right? Ontario. Let's say that the workers there are on average between 19 and 25 an hour, right? Minimum wage goes up $1, so from 16.55 to 17.55. Well, suddenly now a worker who was $1 over minimum wage now is on minimum wage. Surely their pay scale should be pushed up so they're $1 over minimum wage. Still, it's one of those awkwardnesses. And I worked through this with my son because he was on one of these things in one of the jobs he was in, whereby his wages were about $3 to $4 over minimum wage. And what would happen is minimum wage would go up, but his wage wouldn't.
Yeah. Or if you have several people who are at minimum wage in your company, but then there's other people who are above minimum wage, the minimum wage goes up, so your lower paid workers get paid more, but then your higher paid workers put more pressure on you to increase their wages too.
Yeah.
Okay, so it just goes up all the way up the food chain.
Well, in some respects, if wages, I don't know, if say the minimum wage went up 3%, then I guess that the argument would be that you should be putting 3% on everybody's wage. Which would mean that the person, if you're adding 3% to 16.55, it becomes the new minimum wage. But you should then also add minimum wage to the person on 17.55, so they take the same advancement on minimum wage.
Yeah, because otherwise they'll start. There's things when they talk about when you're in the workforce and how many people. Like, this is why a lot of companies, they don't want people talking about how much they get paid. Yeah. And now they're starting to get a little bit more smart about that, where there's some kind of uniformity about how people get paid and transparency.
Yeah, I must admit that most of my working life, I would not divulge to anybody how much I got paid. Yeah, the CEO knew because I negotiated my salary with the CEO, right?
Oh, of course.
And the board. But I wouldn't necessarily know what the CEO earned or what other members of the board earned. I could have a guess based upon intuitive knowledge, but that would be it.
Yeah, like this is where because like the thing is, where I've ever worked, like most of my life I've been mostly self-employed, or if I've worked, it was mostly doing institutional work where I was contracted out, or I'd work in a hospital, or I'd work in a nonprofit organization, or I'd be contracted to do certain types of work. Okay? And I'd be paid some kind of salary for that, but the salary would not be commensurate with what the other workers were paying. Like, they would pay me a higher income because I was not paid the benefits, the same benefits other people were paid, but I would be paid a higher income for that that term.
Yeah. Economist Richard Freeman explained in a book in 1996 called Uneven Tides, Rising Inequality in America. He said there are three ways that minimum wage affects income disparity by distributing more earning power to people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. And he refers to this as redistribution theory. First outcome of increased wages is the cost of producing goods, right? That's for sure, right? Because if you're working in a manufacturing facility, every penny you put on, every penny per hour that you put on the factory floor worker's wage necessarily increases the cost of goods produced.
Yep.
Right? It's a basic structure in there, and you can't deny that. You cannot deny that, right? But generally speaking, those increases, for example, you're putting that factory worker's wages up by $1 an hour. But if you've got 1,000, I don't know, let's say if he's processing 1,000 bottles of shampoo an hour, that might well add less than a cent to the cost of the bottle of shampoo.
Yep. Depends on what you're making, what you're doing, what the manufacturing processes are. Hey, there's different ways you can probably increase your efficiency in terms of the manufacturing processes, and it wouldn't cost as much in terms of an increased wages for people. But unfortunately, what a lot of companies are doing now is that they're automating a lot more, where we're getting robots to do more of this work as opposed to hiring people to do it.
Well, in fact, actually, there was I didn't bring anything up for that on that particular question, but I read something about this because I've been very, very interested in automation for quite some time. Because as a computer person, when I'm growing up in most of my life as a computer person, of course, a lot of what I did was was improving efficiency by automation. You would put into if you're on the production line, there'd be the manufacturing of the bottles, those bottles of shampoo would be counted, and so we know how many we've got in stock. If you could tweak the production line up to produce, instead of 1,000 an hour, to produce 1,050 an hour, which might only be a small adjustment, that could actually affect the numbers of bottles that we have available for sale at the end of the day. And if a big order comes in for shampoos, you can accommodate such an order.
Yeah, because these are ways that they have learned with the assembly line and the specialty. It comes all after the Henry Ford formula when he built that. And how to build something and build it fast through manufacturing process. It's just too bad that Henry Ford, what he thought, he says he wanted to have his workers be able to afford the products that they make. Okay, so he insisted on paying the workers well.
And that actually is an important thing. That's actually related to what I was saying about, if you look at Google and Microsoft today, there isn't a worker who works for those companies that's poor, that's on minimum wage, because they pay back into the workforce that they've got. Even the janitor makes a good wage, right? Even the janitor has shares in the company, right? Because they recognize the value that those people bring. Because you don't get a happy worker working at their computer keyboard who's cutting code for you isn't happy if his bin isn't emptied when he goes home at night, right? That sort of thing. He doesn't have to think about the janitor, right? The janitor just does it. No fuss. It's done. And hey, that worker might complain if in the morning the bin is still full. But the point being is that and I think Ford gets it in the same regard, right? That
Yeah,
he
like
wants
this is one of the
workers to
things.
be able
Like
to build
there's,
a product. Yeah.
yeah, this is one of the things. Like I can't say that we got to get all the companies to pay people better in Niagara because I don't think we can legislate that.
No,
But
that
I
is
think what we
that
need to
is a
do
big
is bring in a
problem.
diversity of industry here to
Yeah,
Niagara because right now
exactly.
what we have is we don't have a diversity of industry.
And that's actually one of the issues that we have, particularly here in Niagara Falls. We have a large percentage of our population actually on or below um, the okay, so let's start with that. In relation to that, the Niagara region average salary in Canada for 2024, so how much does the average Niagara person make? Any individual on average makes 54,738 annually, right?
Hmm.
The low point in there is 37,050. The high point in there is 110,000. Well, actually, we know there are people who earn a lot more than 110,000. We only have to look at our current mayor, the chief administrative officer of both Niagara Falls, St. Catherine, well, of all of
Public sector
Niagara.
workers.
Yeah, they often earn a lot more than
Hmm.
110,000. So, and I would say that there are definitely some people who earn a lot more. But what concerns me is the low end salary of 37,050.
See, unfortunately, when you have a high number of people as well who make very good salaries, like say over 150 grand or whatever it is that you're identifying, the people who are in the lower end of the spectrum, they can't afford to live here
Yeah.
because their prices are set for those that are earning on the higher end.
Yeah. And let's also, just to compare that, the average salary in Ontario is 68,746 per year. And to put that out on an average, that's $33.05 an hour.
Yeah. So people who are paying people in Niagara region needs to consider that as well. Try to get some like Kitchener Waterloo. They made themselves a tech hub,
Yeah, they
and
do.
they've developed a lot of multiple industries where they are.
Well,
They
one
have
of
a
the
lot of they have a large component where there's property management. They have tech sector. They have consulting sector. They have a lot of different jobs in Kitchener Waterloo when they had a very low income.
yeah, one of the I was when I campaigned at the local election, is one of the points I campaigned upon was encouraging encouraging high value jobs to be brought to the Niagara region, Niagara Falls and the Niagara
Mhm.
region, and the reason I said Niagara region is, yes, I was standing in Niagara Falls, but again, if there's a job brought to Welland, if there's a high value job brought to Welland or a high value job brought to Thorold, Niagara workers have the right to actually apply for those jobs.
Yeah, you can go commute to those jobs and
Yeah,
okay, and then you got a job and it's still nearby for people.
yeah,
And then this is something that and it'll also build more money into the region, which is good.
so yeah. Hi, Mike. Yeah, you're going to play in the rain. Yeah, have a great weekend.
Okay, sounds like it's going to be raining all weekend, so you're going to have a great weekend playing.
I know well, when I looked at the funny thing is, when I looked at, I don't often look at the weather forecast for the average week, but of course, being Eclipse Day Monday, I did look at the weather forecast, and it was interesting how the weather forecast for the week was beautiful sunshine on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning, cloud moving in on Monday afternoon, then beautiful sunshine on Tuesday, Wednesday morning, before the rest of the week becomes rainy. Like, how
Yeah, it
does
was only after the eclipse. Like the eclipse was cloudy over here, and we couldn't see anything. but
Yeah.
it was just like right after the eclipse. I would say maybe a good 15, 20 minutes after the eclipse. The sun came out. It was a beautiful blue sky.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing that, isn't it? You know, hey, it just
Yeah.
disappeared. Poof, like we're done. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, if we're going to look at, so terms of the pros and cons of raising minimum wage is the primary argument advanced in favor of minimum wage is that higher earnings can improve the overall standard of living for the minimum wage work of the lowest paid workers, and by providing them with more appropriate income level to handle any cost of living increases that occur. And the primary argument that's against minimum wage is that um, they argue that raising minimum wage would result in wages and salaries increasing costs across the board, and therefore subsequently operating expenses for companies would increase the price of products and services that they increase to cover the increased labor cost. Right?
Yep, that's true. There's always a balance, and this was always something that's gone in discussion for many, many years. I remember reading about minimum wage and studies of minimum wage way back in the 70s when
Yeah.
they started discussing this. And this went around with the basic income up in Dauphin, Manitoba, when they did the basic income experiment back then,
Yeah.
called MinCom. And
Okay.
then they were talking about minimum wage following that to see what we should do about that for people who are working.
Well, and that's an interesting question. Like universal basic income is another interesting question. We can more or less see from the um, uh, CERB that was handed out during COVID. It was absolutely necessary. It was the right decision to introduce CERB.
Yeah.
That became, though, in a way, somewhat of a large test bed for what universal basic income may be. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
did show that the poverty level went right down
Yeah.
when CERB was handed out. There were less children living in poverty. People were able to save some money and so forth. You know, they're able to. They weren't as far in debt
And
as they were. And now, after the CERB and everything came out, and now that the government's starting to chase about 98% of the people who got CERB, trying to get it repaid, we're finding that people right back in poverty again.
yeah, and the point being is what, irrespective of whether one should have gotten or shouldn't have gotten served,
Yeah,
that's a completely different question about here.
yeah,
But the point being is that I've actually been an opponent, generally speaking, of universal basic income, and a lot of that has come because I've been self-employed for a large portion of my life, or been an owner of a small business. I was owner of a small software company. We you know, we weren't one of these people that paid minimum wage to anybody either, right? But
hmm
the point being is that I do get that one of the questions though is that if you're talking about a universal basic income, it occurred to me, it's like, okay, so um, Angela, I'm employing you and I'm giving you $100,000 salary. But in order to give you your universal basic income amount, I've got to take off $2,000 a month from your salary to pay to the government in order that the government pays you that $2,000 a month.
Well, the thing is, it doesn't work that way.
Well,
Yeah, but if I'm making a
basic,
hundred thousand
yeah,
dollars, that works. But if you're not making $100,000, then you're not able to work, or you're not working. Something like that would work well for people. And as you make $100,000 a year, you may not be like all of that gets clawed back. It's sort of like people who are making more than I think it's 80 or something. I'm trying to think of what it is when the OAS starts getting clawed back after they get up to a certain income.
Yeah, but my point was that as a small business owner, and as a small business owner with employees that were all high earners, I'd have to pay more in taxes than I currently did in order for universal basic income to happen.
It depends. They've done studies on it, and you have to think about it. If you're paying a higher income, if you're paying a higher basic income out, you're not paying anything for welfare. You're not paying anything for unemployment. You're not paying anything for many of these other types of income programs, and to some extent, you're saving on some other areas where people with a lower average income are taking up more in the system, such as healthcare and other things. So it really depends. Like these things have actually been counted, okay? But it really depends on how you're doing it. The problem that I would have with it is how much do you set for a basic income, okay? Okay, what's acceptable, and who should get it? And there's some people who should get more of a basic income than other people. You know, these are things that that I would have problems with if I was going to try to implement a policy, because people with disabilities, for example, generally have higher expenses, usually about 40% higher expenses than the average person. So do we pay people with disabilities 40% more than everybody else who's on a basic income?
Well, and here's actually that's an interesting question, because
Yeah.
I've been looking at that, because obviously, as a law firm, we deal with people with disabilities all the time, not
Mhm.
just because they're doing ODSP claims, which I know you deal with a lot of.
We do LTB, we do
But we've got
WSIB, we do a
exactly
whole lot of
we've got
things.
yeah, but we've got people who are on ODSP that are landlord and that are tenants, and uh, they find it tough to actually pay their dues, but they pay, right? They pay.
Mhm.
It's an important thing. They know the value that we as a firm give, and that they pay them the money. But the point being is that when you look at what the average rents are today, an ODSP person cannot even get on the rung, of renting anymore right now. And that's ridiculous when you think about it. You could probably triple the ODSP payouts to the average ODSP person, and they still couldn't get a rental place in certain parts of the country.
Yeah, and a lot of landlords will say, "Oh, no ODSP. We don't want
Yeah,
ODSP recipients."
mind you, that's a I'd be taking what you need to be doing is taking them straight to the Human Rights Tribunal.
Yeah, they need to come to our office so that we can sue, okay? Because that is against the law. You can't discriminate against people because of an income source.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so one of the things is, okay, so the new guy gets $2 more, and the guy with 5 years experience gets a $2 bump. I would say we were talking about that as I was talking about percentage points rather than flat rates.
Yeah, like this was saying, like if somebody was coming in on minimum wage and then minimum wage gets bumped up, okay? Like all the people above them, like up the food chain, also get bumped up.
Yeah, they should all.
Yeah, because this
And
is
and
because
here's the
everybody
thing.
starts saying, "Well, what about my wages? I can't keep up with the cost of living either."
Yeah. Well, here's the issue is, let's say that you've got 100 people in your firm, three of which are on minimum wage, and the others are appropriately portioned upwards from there, including the CEO, who makes a reasonable packet, right? Now, it's only logical that if minimum wage goes up by $1, that in fact actually everybody should go up by the same percentage amount, not by $1, but by the same percentage amount.
Yep. Yep, to try to get that them people up so that, because right now it's so hard for anybody to afford it. It's not just for people who are on ODSP,
Because what
but
you don't
even even workers like people who are working, and because people are working 2 or 3 jobs now because they can't afford to keep one job. Like it's just you can't afford it.
Well, that's actually something we should not be encouraging, right? People working 2 or 3 jobs, no. And especially since, hey, I've gone to school to get the job I want,
Yep.
right? But I'm still working, skip the dishes in the evening.
Oh yes, that's happened.
That type of thing, right? We
Hmm.
shouldn't be doing that. People shouldn't be doing that. In fact, I'd be in favor of making second jobs illegal.
Hmm.
Not that you can, but you know
But
what?
but if you did that, you'd have to make sure
Oh,
the first
I know.
job's paid well enough.
Yes, absolutely. But as I said, one of my campaign points was actually how can we improve local, you know, can we get higher value jobs in the area? And I talked to the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce about that, and they said absolutely. One of the important aspects that the Chamber of Commerce is involved in is helping businesses that are members find ways to actually be able to pay people reasonable rates for their job.
Yep.
Right. And actually it's an important aspect that I think almost any entrepreneur should consider.
Yeah, and this is one of the things, like a lot of startups will try to include it, particularly when you're hiring somebody particularly skilled. You have
Yeah.
to know where they would normally get on the pay scale and try to pay them in a way that's reasonable. A lot of the products that you're making, especially when you start making the products and they go out to market, I mean, you're not going to be selling them out to market for cheap. You're going to be selling them out to market for a good amount of money, and with the price for that, and you do your cost accounting, you want to be able to pay people reasonably well out of what you get in, when comes in. So, I mean, this is something that we do all the time to make sure that our fees are reasonable, and sometimes we have these flat rates that we put out. We want to make sure that people are not like our rates are based partially on market research and partially on the value of the item that we're
Yeah.
charging for. So it's very complex how they set rates. Hey, but to have somebody above us say, "Oh, you've got to only charge this rate, or you can only charge that rate, or you can only sell the product for this much," that's going to be very, very difficult to enforce.
And actually I think where we bring most value when in terms of jobs is actually when we bring originating jobs. You know, it's if you're selling somebody else's product, there's it doesn't it's not a high value job, right?
Hmm.
It's valuable to the community because we all need products, we all need to buy products, but
Hmm.
it's not actually improving our economy by, the job of selling somebody else's product is not improving our local economy. The job of inventing a product is improving the value proposition that we have in the world.
Hmm. Creativity is important. The
Creativity
arts
is
are the
vital.
arts are underpaid. The cultural sector is underpaid. There needs to be some way of boosting them up too, because there are people who are
Uh,
very creative,
I
and that's
wasn't actually.
essential.
You're actually that's an separate but interesting question. I was thinking of creativity as in the business person who creates the next generation widget.
Oh yeah.
You
Well,
know,
that's something you and I can get to work on when we get back to the office.
creating the next generation widget. No, I don't think so. It's not really
Yeah,
it's not really our creativity
I
anymore.
know that's not in our bailiwick.
Yeah, yeah. It used to be something I used to concern myself with, but software products, of course.
Hmm.
Right. So the question here is that, it, you know, um, the argument about labor being the major cost in terms of businesses, and that if you're going to increase wages, therefore you might have to cut jobs to maintain profitability. It's a complex one, that, isn't it?
That's a complex one, like whether you're going to cut jobs, which jobs are you going to cut?
Yeah.
And the people who are left over, they're going to be not very happy with you because they're going to be ending up doing more work. Okay, so there has to be some way of balancing things out so that that can happen. The answers are not very easy to come by, but I think that there should be some development area. Like if you're developing a new business, there should be some way of not having to pay taxes for a little bit. If you're setting up some shop downtown, not have to pay taxes, or you can get a break on your business site, or get some kind of break on some training fees for your workers, different things like that. There should be some help so that you can actually get over that hump and get your business growth to a point of hiring more people. Okay. Unfortunately, there's not enough people who think wisely like that, and when they do, it becomes abused, where you'll have somebody who is like a company can be on the take too, okay, where they start taking a lot of this but not really hiring anybody with it. Okay, so there has to be some more accountability with that type of program.
Yeah, and it's the whole question of accountability. And I'm not saying that you basically blithely take on it's a fine balance with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The cost of wages. And even though it's easy to actually say, hey, Walmart could add on $2 an hour to everybody's wage who works in Walmart throughout the entire world, and the Walton family won't become poor, right?
Yeah.
It's true that they would probably lose out some profitability, but they won't become poor, right?
Yeah, they could still buy their Gulfstream and their latest Gulfstream, and they could still buy their yachts and all that stuff, and their latest 17th mansion. Okay, they could still do that. Okay, even after $2 an hour, even $5 an hour.
Yeah, and the point
But
being,
this is the problem with a lot of it. Income inequality is a very bad problem to have, and you have to try to deal with it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with people getting wealthy, but when people are getting wealthy at the expense of keeping other people down, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with the Walmart model.
Yeah, exactly. And you try to, because there was some, I think he did one of those point of sale type of software companies. This guy, he lived by the model that the lowest paid worker in his company should not be paid, like he should be paid no more than 10 times the amount of the lowest paid worker in his company.
Well, that used to
and
be,
he lived by that.
There used to be the philosophy, I've heard of this. Used to be a philosophy that that the most the president or CEO should be taking, the owner should be taking from the business, would be 100 times what the lowest paid worker it was earning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 100 times is a massive differential, and we're talking as Mike was pointing out earlier on. I think he said there are some CEOs are making 500 times what their workers are making, and that's a big problem.
That's like your CEO. Like you take like on New Year's, just the day after New Year's Day, you take your first cup of coffee. The day already made your year's salary.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, exactly, and that's I've just made that. And the problem here is in you should never have that attitude either. But now there are some people who would be like, well, I just made what that scum on the factory floor makes in a year.
Yeah,
So,
and that's
can I can I actually do, so not even raising the cup to my lips, can I make sure that's the actual, that's I don't want them earning anymore. I want more profit. That cup shouldn't even touch my lips on the first day of the year before I make, before I'm in profit from that worker.
Yeah,
Right?
and this
So
is
that's
where
attitudes we don't want.
what produces a lot of the anger and the angst that people have.
Yeah.
That they're not able to get ahead, not able to climb up their corporate ladder, whatever, So this is a thing. Okay. And many people are not even able to get in the door of a company to get hired. So it's the whole thing is too unrealistic how we could try to create things, but it certainly needs to be changed, and the change has to be done in a way that's respectful of the people that are coming to work for them, and utilizing the skills that they have and compensating well for the skills.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of been an interesting discussion. And, it started because one of the topics we identified on Wednesday was the need for higher value jobs being brought to Niagara. And it certainly seems there are plenty ways that we can make that happen. Right? We just discussed a few here today.
Yep, exactly. And people who are out there who are letter writers, write to their politicians, write to the province, write to the feds, write to our regional leaders. Right? Get them working on it, because this is something that we need.
That's something that actually we don't have enough of anymore, letter writers. Politicians of yesteryear used to receive, great big bundles of mail every day. People, constituents and others writing to them.
Well, you send emails to them, they can ignore them.
Yeah. And that is a big problem. All right. Well, I think we've kind of covered enough for today, and we'll see everybody back on Monday when we're going to be talking about the topic of transportation.
Okay.
We've talked partly about that, and we talked about how we need to improve transit around Niagara has been one of the key factors that we need for Niagara. So let's bring that up on, do a bit of research and see whether we can actually come up with a better transit plan for Niagara.
Yep. Apparently they're looking for one over the next 18 months. So maybe we can put some information and ideas in.
Yeah. And I think that's an important topic, and we'll get to it Monday. Okay.
Okay.
All right.